Hi, this is Matt Braynard presenting the final findings and my conclusions of the Voter Integrity Project. Before we get started, I want to get a few things out of the way. First of all, thanks. I want to thank my team, those that I can name, those I can't, those that I can name, Vito, Cam, and Thomas, along with Justin at the satellite office, as well as so many people whose names I really can't share because they're not really comfortable with the spotlight, but did a tremendous amount of hard work. I also want to thank the many, many donors, almost 9,000 of you who funded this project and made it possible. And I don't think I've ever been prayed for so much in my life as I have been as I've undertaken this project. And most importantly, I want to thank my wife, who has put up with a lot as this has unfolded and has been nothing short of completely supportive. And I'm very grateful and very blessed to have her. Some opening notes. First, I want to apologize if I haven't been responsive to certain people reaching out to me. After this started, my inbox, Twitter and email, my texts on my phone, they were just exploding nonstop. And I usually did my best to respond saying thank you and I appreciate it. A lot of people offering to do things, a lot of people with data backgrounds, etc., offering to help with the project. In many cases, I really couldn't make use of that given the time frame and what we had to do. But I do appreciate it. So if I didn't respond to you and you sent me some message, I saw it and I apologize, just did not have the time to do it, because if I responded to everybody that was sending me long emails with all kinds of ideas and theories, some of them pretty solid, I wouldn't have had any time to get the work done. So I want to make clear to you that all of the material that's been collected here, that's been funded, has been shared with multiple legal teams, including the campaigns and various independent efforts, and it is in fact going into many of the filings across all of the pivotal states. And I've signed quite a few declarations. A lot of work and analysis has been done where what we discovered here was used as the basis for additional statistical projections. So what has happened here is making a difference in the courtroom. Whether it makes a difference beyond that, hard to say, but it has certainly fortified many of the arguments that attorneys who are trying to determine the truth here, it helps them out by giving them additional ammunition to make their case. When all of this is done in the next couple weeks, probably the later part of this week or maybe the beginning of next, after I'm done with much of the litigation support I've been engaged in, I will be releasing a white paper that goes into all of this in depth, all of the methods, all of the findings, along with releasing top-line data and certain voter data sets. We'll also be releasing the line item budget of what all of this costs, and hopefully I'll have found an independent auditor to review these expenses to make sure that I have spent the money I said I would spend, and that all of the give, send, go money was carefully stewarded. I also hopeful that some of the people who watch this, who maybe you're podcast hosts or you're in the media, I'd love to set up as much as possible Q&As so that anybody that's out there would like to ask a question can do so, and I'd be happy to respond. I think it's very important with a project like this that it be absolutely transparent. So there's really no question related to it that I'm not happy to answer, even though sometimes I might not have the answer. So what this project was trying to do was to establish a concrete finding. This is different than I think what a lot of the other voices on this issue have been raising, which are what I would consider somewhat speculative or something that's purely analytical. And I've seen a lot of very convincing videos showing charts and scatter plots and maps and making the case for software hacking and servers overseas influencing the outcome and vote switching on machines. And I'm not disagreeing, or I'm not saying any of that stuff is incorrect, but I think there's a problem sometimes with that, where if you personally do not have expertise in that area, and somebody who is a purported expert explains to you what has taken place, that's something nefarious or something complicated, either involving complex mathematical formula or some code in some software somewhere, they can be very convincing. And if you don't have a strong background in that area that you can question it, you can believe them, but you're believing them solely on the basis of trust. And what that also means is that somebody else who you may also trust can also make a very contrary convincing argument. And I don't want to be in a position where I'm taking on faith somebody that may not know that well, or somebody that's making a case where I can't push back. I don't have enough understanding of the technicalities to make an argument or to really understand or to appreciate it. Because when I'm listening to, say, an advanced statistician making an analysis, or some software engineering guy making an argument about voting machines, I just have to trust them. I don't want anybody to have to do that with any of my findings, because everything that we're putting together here at VIP should be very accessible, completely understandable. And if you were to sit here next to me and I was open up the raw call records or some of the other analyses we did, it would be very obvious what was going on. You would not need a degree in statistics. You would not need some kind of a computer engineering degree to understand the findings that we have here. And I think that's very important. And it also makes it very easy to reproduce. So if somebody else wanted to do what I had done here and what my team had done, they could do it, and ideally they come out with the same results. I do want to give some allowance, though, is that I'm very open to any criticism of how this was conducted, to hearing any errors that I may have made or my team may have made, or somebody's that can make a very good case in terms of what our findings are, why I may be drawing the wrong conclusions from them. So I do have to always allow for that, is that I might have made a mistake, our team may have made a mistake. There's lots of ways to make a mistake in this field. I've made many of them in the 25 years I've worked in it. So I'm very aware that I'm open to hearing other people's take on our material and how I might be wrong. So now let's go through the summary of the findings. So I'm going to take you through each of the analyses that we did. Much of this has been presented already on Twitter and other social media networks, but I'm going to consolidate all of it here, and these would be the most accurate and up-to-date numbers from our findings. So we're going to look at some of the programs we did, which is an analysis of the unreturned absentee, of LowAct and NCOA voters, dead voters, residency and double voting issues, issues with Wisconsin, and issues with Georgia and Pennsylvania. So let's start off with unreturned absentee. Now this sort of started off for us as a little bit of for me as a bit of a curiosity, because in all of these states there were substantial populations of people who had requested an absentee ballot but not returned it. So we took that raw data from the state, as we did for all of these analyses. We appended phone numbers to it, and then we called these people and first identified that they were the people we were trying to reach. Because often with phone appends, sometimes it's not the right person or something goes wrong. So we always confirmed that the person we were trying to reach by full name was who we were talking to. And then we asked some questions. We asked whether or not they had requested that absentee ballot. Because in all the states we did this experiment, that was required. And then we asked whether or not they had returned the ballot. So if they requested the ballot, or if they told us they did not request a ballot, that's a problem, because they were supposed to have done that. If they told us that they had in fact returned the ballot, that's also a problem, because the state did not record them as having returned it. Now across the top you can see sort of the universe of unreturned absentee ballots. One caveat here for Pennsylvania is that we just focused on registered Republicans, and all the other states that is it's not partisan. So it's the total population for those universes. And then you can see, the phone match rate, and then the number of people we were able to reach via phone. And to those of you who may be unfamiliar with phone survey research, I've worked in this field going all the way back to working for Frank Luntz's firm in 1997. I can tell you that the drop-off is pretty typical, and in some cases it's actually increasing. The number of people you've got to call, the number of phone numbers you've got to dial in order to reach a given population continues to increase. So it's very difficult to get people on the phone. But ultimately, the folks that we did reach, you can see the counts across the top here. And then we showed the number that requested and did not request. So I got a lot of anecdotal messages from people who they themselves received absentee ballots despite maybe not living in the state, or not requesting them, or intending to vote in person or early, or family members, etc. So many anecdotes of that. And here across the bottom you can see, these are pretty good sample sizes, the number of people who did not request. So in Arizona, of the people we reached, over 44% of them did not request that ballot. Georgia, we found 18%, 24% in Michigan, 32 or almost 33% in Pennsylvania, and in Wisconsin, 18%. Those are pretty startling numbers, because the question is, how did that ballot get requested? Who did that? Did somebody else do it in that person's name? Is it possible that the people we talked to maybe lied to us, or maybe did it and forgot about it? Is there clerical error where people marked as having requested who didn't? Was there a clerical error that could be this substantial? Then we look at the people, and we're just talking about now down here, the people who did request that ballot, who said, yes, I requested it. We asked them whether or not they returned it. And in many cases they did not, but in many cases they say that they did. So now the question is, what happened to these ballots? Why didn't they get counted? Why didn't they get back to the clerk's office? And again, in states where you've got such close margins, this is significant. So I do want to make a note here. So this is not, we did not run this experiment in Nevada, because they did, in fact, mass mail ballots to their entire universe. So this first question would have been irrelevant. So we put Nevada aside, but we ran it across all the other states. Now, some people have done projections, statisticians with serious academic credentials have done projections where they take these universes and then apply them to the universe as a whole. And that, to me, as a non-statistician, seems fairly, it seems to make sense, because when we do surveys or polling work, there's always margin of error. And why is there margin of error? Because we are making an estimate in terms of what the entire population may have been doing, or how they would respond to a question. So these are the universes, and that has found its way into court documents. Anyway, let's go on to the next analysis. This is the low activity analysis and the NCOA analysis. With the low activity analysis, this was very experimental, very much a shot in the dark. And what I did was I isolated, in precincts that had very high turnout, individuals who had never voted before, or had maybe voted just once or something like that. These people fell into one of two categories: either people who registered a while back because they got a driver's license, or some other, graduated from high school, something else that they just, they didn't really, they weren't eager to get registered, they weren't ever eager to vote. The second category are people who registered very recently. And the theory being that in many cases where there is a ballot harvesting operation, there's also a voter registration harvesting operation, and that they often work together or organized by the same people. This is just theoretical. And the idea being that if we ran this experiment, we would start finding people who would tell us that they actually, in fact, did not vote. So if we go back to the numbers, you can see that there are respondents in these universes on those data loads. Now, if you're wondering why Michigan has a round data load, that's because there were budget issues as we were getting close to the end, and Michigan was the last state we ran, so we kind of capped it at that. But I do think these are significant in their percentages, even though they're very small amounts. And I want to make the point that if you actually were running some kind of, if somebody was in fact running some kind of organized operation to cast ballots in other people's names, it would be unlikely, for us to find a significant number. I think that we would find the trace amounts, which is what we're finding here. So it does not necessarily surprise me that we find these numbers if this is what we're looking for. And what I'd like to, I compare it to is a COVID test. So when you go get your COVID test, they don't autopsy you and look all over your body for all the signs of COVID. They just take a very small sample. And if they find just a couple of antibodies, well, that's really all it takes to demonstrate that something happened. So here's the question with these people. How did they get marked as having voted despite saying they didn't vote? Are they not telling the truth to us? When we called them and said, hey, is this your name? Maybe they didn't hear it right and they just ignored it. Perhaps, again, maybe there was clerical error. That's possible, but I think that, I think this should be looked into more closely to find out exactly how these people were marked as having voted, how they had ballots cast despite the fact that they denied it. We'll go on to the NCOA check, which is very similar. We've had this universe of people in each of the states who NCOA'd, so they no longer live at the address of record where they were registered, which means in many cases maybe an absentee ballot request form, which might have been sent to them automatically, was sent to their house, and somebody may have filled it out and returned it. There's all kinds of theoretical ways, but again, the thinking here is that theoretically, if you were running a ballot harvesting operation, you would intentionally target people who had not voted before, which is naturally the low activity people. But also, one reason people may not have voted before or not shown up as voting is because they moved away. So again, we showed very trace amounts but when you look at the percentage of the people we reached, when you look at Nevada, that's a somewhat significant number. I think that when you look at Georgia, especially given how close Georgia is, that appears to be a significant number. Pennsylvania, no, guess not. But I did think this was an important experiment to do. And I want you to remember something too. When we were making these calls, it's very hard to get somebody on the phone to begin with. And then it's also hard to ask what is a relatively personal question. Folks are very likely to hang up or send it to voicemail. But when we were calling through our universes, we reached a lot of people where we just left them a voicemail. And we asked them to call them back. Some people did call us back, but most people didn't. But one of the people that we did reach and did leave a voicemail with actually made quite a story with the discovery that a ballot had been cast in their name. So we're going to take a quick look at this segment from Laura Ingram's show on Fox News.
All-American wrestler Nahshon Garrett moved from Maricopa County, Arizona to Tennessee about 5 months ago so he could train for the Olympics. So you can imagine his surprise when he got a message from something called the Voter Integrity Fund.
The state of Arizona is reporting that a ballot was cast in the name of Nahshon Garrett in the general election on Tuesday. If Nahshon Garrett did not cast this ballot, please call us back.
Well, that doesn't sound fishy at all, right? Well, Nahshon didn't think so either. So he went to the state of Arizona's voting website only to discover that his ballot had been accepted. And Maricopa County's voter portal said his ballot was signature verified and counted. The only problem is he'd already voted in Tennessee. He didn't vote in Arizona. Nahshon Garrett joins me now. Nahshon, great to see you. Now, you never received an Arizona absentee ballot or an application for mail-in ballot, so who the heck cast your ballot in Arizona?
That is an excellent question. That is an excellent question. I have no idea, and that's the reason why I'm on here with you tonight.
What does it make you think about this process in Arizona that we understand from this statement tonight that it's been examined and there were no irregularities found? That's what the post-election audit in Arizona said, that Phoenix and Maricopa County, no irregularities.
So I'm going to post a link to that down below so you can watch the full interview, but I think you got the gist of it. Somebody cast the ballot for him, and it was signature verified. So again, he's not in these numbers on the PowerPoint chart. He's not here. He just went to voicemail like so many others did. And again, when somebody starts asking you about something being cast in your name and it's government related, I can understand a hesitancy, because many of these people, in fact, when they did agree to talk to us, we said, or they did agree that they had cast a ballot or had not cast a ballot. We'd say, well, would you be willing to sign an affidavit or a declaration? And there was a big drop off, because once you do that, well, you've got other things you've got to consider. If I called you up and said, hey, did you cast that ballot, was cast in your name? You say no. Okay. Then I say, well, are you willing to sign a declaration or an affidavit? Suddenly the calculus all changes. You start thinking, how is this going to affect my life? What is my wife going to think? How is this going to affect my family? Am I going to have a target on my back? Am I going to get doxxed, et cetera, et cetera? So throughout this, though, we were successfully able to find enough people who are upset about it that they did sign declarations, and attorneys were able to follow up to get affidavits from them. And those have all actually been filed in court. So the declarations we've collected have been filed. But again, numbers-wise, it gets a little tough. It's very hard to get somebody who may have been wronged here, in many cases the victim of voter fraud, just like Nahshon was, to step forward and again put a target on their back. So let's continue with the presentation here. Yeah, so we saw his story, and moving along, dead voter analysis. This is one that I heard a lot about, And we did a pretty robust analysis of this. We bumped up against the early and absentee voters, against the Social Security Death Index and the Master Death File. That's very difficult for a lot of reasons. Among the reasons is that in many cases, states don't have accurate date of births on their voter records, and that's absolutely required to get a reliable match. There are other issues too, such as the way people seem to have the same names, especially intergenerational, even live at the same addresses. So when we got our findings back, very low numbers from the SSDI and MDF match, we then added another layer of scrutiny to see if we could actually confirm whether or not these people were definitely dead. And in very few cases were we able to confirm it. I've been provided with lists from people who've said, like, this is a list of thousands of dead people who voted, and then I spend a little bit of time on the list, and not only do these dead people vote, but I can call them on the phone and talk to them. So a lot of false positives in some of the other analyses I've seen. I'm open to being proven wrong. If somebody wants to share data with me and explain their precise methodology, I'd be more than happy to hear it. But so far, this was not an analysis on its own fruitful. I cannot say that there was an effort targeting the deceased to vote in their name. Now, we did discover incidentally people through our NCOA program or other ways of outreach, people saying, or Unreturned, we'd ask, hey, did you request that absentee ballot or did you cast that vote? And we end up talking to a widow of the person we were trying to reach saying, no, he absolutely did not. And they were never flagged as being dead. Again, it's very difficult in this country to programmatically determine who is dead and who is not. So I really can't draw any conclusions either way. Our finding was we just didn't detect it. So moving on. This is the residency analysis, which turned out to be very fruitful in terms of finding substantial numbers. Now, this isn't some kind of sexy undercover discovery of a mass voter fraud operation. This is just people voting who should not be voting in these states. Now, again, this is one where I got flooded with anecdotes of people sending me pictures of coworkers who no longer reside in the state but may have once before, and are happy to shop around where they want to cast that ballot, and they think, look, not going to make any difference voting here in New York City, but I've still got that absentee ballot request and that old address at my parents' home in Georgia, so I'm going to cast it there. So what is NCOA? Whenever you move, you want your mail to go with you, so you fill out a card with the Postal Service letting them know where your forwarding address is. Well, that goes into the NCOA database, and that database gets sold to people like me for a lot of money. It's very expensive. The Postal Service makes a lot of money on it, but it's very useful for catalog mailers who don't want to send stuff to the wrong address, right? And but it also indicates that you have moved, that you've gone somewhere else, and the number of people we matched to moving to out-of-state addresses is significant. And once you've established residency in another state, you lose the right to vote in that state. And I'll just going through the numbers here. In Arizona, over 5,000. In Georgia, 15,700, almost 16,000. In Michigan, over 12,000. Nevada, over 5,000. Pennsylvania, almost 7,500. Wisconsin, over 6,000. We also have subsequent registration out of state. Now, what that means is that somebody registered to vote subsequent to the date that they registered to vote in one of these target states where they actually did cast a ballot. So how that would work is you register to vote in Georgia, you move to South Carolina, you register to vote in South Carolina, and then you cast a ballot, an earlier absentee ballot, back in Georgia, where you're not supposed to cast that ballot because you're no longer a legal resident. And we did this by comparing registration dates on the target state and the national file. So we were able to find people to do that. And again, that was dependent on getting a very reliable match on date of birth. So in truth, these numbers are actually probably significantly higher, given how much difficulty we had getting accurate dates of birth for individuals. I'm also going to this also ties into the double voter analysis. Again, these are people who we actually found cast ballots in multiple states or had ballots cast in their name in multiple states. So we're not pointing a finger at anybody necessarily, but a ballot was cast in in registrations in multiple states for these individuals. And these numbers are also incredibly low because these only include those who cast earlier absentee ballots in both states. So if you were in Georgia and you moved to South Carolina and you've registered in both, you cast an early absentee ballot in Georgia, but then you voted in person in South Carolina, as we'd expect to be the case for many people, you're not in these numbers. And this, again, is hampered by difficulty getting reliable matches based on date of birth, because unless we had complete confidence in that match, we didn't call it. We didn't identify it as being a double vote, just the same way we didn't for subsequent registrations out of state. So both of these numbers are particularly low because of the birth date issue. Now, down here you can see merge. This merges NCOA with subsequent registrations. So these are the numbers that we believe of people who cast ballots who no longer met the residency requirements. You can see they're quite significant, especially in states where there are close margins. Okay, now in the course of doing this analysis, we set out again with 6 experiments across 6 states, but in the process of that, we were discovering other things that made us curious. And one of the things that made us curious in the state of Wisconsin was the way that the indefinitely confined absentee ballots worked. Now, in Wisconsin, it's very difficult to vote early to vote absentee. And there's one small exception to that. In fact, that exception also does not require you to show ID. It's the only way you can vote early absentee in Wisconsin without showing an ID, and that is through indefinite confinement. Now, this status is reserved for people like your grandmother who may be bedridden or somebody in a very difficult situation where they are in fact indefinitely confined to one location. They can't go somewhere and vote or otherwise do something that would allow them to show an ID. And historically, maybe just a couple hundred people had voted using this method in the state of Wisconsin. All that really changed this election cycle. So I'll show you the chart. This chart shows the number of people who cast indefinitely confined ballots this cycle and the year that they made that initial request. So you can see here among the people who voted indefinitely confined in Wisconsin, 1,216 of them originally requested that status in 2010. 2011, just 811 of them did. 2015, just 972 had made that request in this year. However, you see the numbers start to rise here, and then they dramatically shoot up in 2020. Now, I want to make clear that COVID was not considered a legal excuse to request this status. So here's what we found on social media after taking a random sample of 10,000 of these individuals, seeing who we could find on sites like Facebook or Instagram, and then making a best effort attempt to assess whether or not they really had IC status or should have taken it. So we were able to search 429 individuals out of that random universe of 10,000. On social media, we were able to find 84 of them. We determined that 10 of them were, in fact, worthy of the IC status, but we determined that 38 definitely did not meet the standard for being indefinitely confined. And, obviously there were quite a lot of people in the sample that we were inconclusive of, but I think these numbers are pretty telling, pretty revealing, that there was possibly a lot of people requesting this ballot status illegally. And again, this is the one status that requires you to not have to show ID. Now we're going to look at another problem. Many addresses that we discovered, and I got to give credit to the satellite team led by Justin, discovered that many of the addresses of people who voted earlier absentee were in fact not legit residential addresses. Now, in Georgia, you do list your residential address and your mailing address, but you are required that your residential address be where you live. If you're homeless, it could be a homeless shelter or something like that. Maybe the hotel where you sort of stay around, or if you live in your car, where your car is parked. Okay, that's all legitimate. But for many of these residential addresses, we found that they were postal facilities, places that the Postal Service either owns or leases, which includes FedEx shops, the UPS stores, or just postal services. And not only that, we discovered that many of these registrations had disguised the fact that they were in fact P.O. Box by using labels such as apartment number, suite number, unit number, when clearly they were basically P.O. boxes. And this was a means of concealing it, which sort of indicates to me an attempt to disguise. And we found in Georgia, I'll show you the chart again, so far, 1,237 early and absentee ballots and a few election day voters who were using this technique, as well as in Pennsylvania, 1,452. And I want to make clear, too, is that in Georgia, peculiarly enough, almost all of these people voted by mail. So that in itself is kind of curious, because in the general population of Georgia, you'd find some people that voted on election day, a substantial percentage. That was not the case. Very, very few people voted on election day that had registered under these at these addresses that we had matched to postal facilities. And because this is these are just voter records. We'll be releasing this full data sets of both of these for both Georgia and Pennsylvania. So far, we haven't identified this as being a major problem in any other state, but we're looking at it a little bit further. One thing I've wanted to do, and this will be the case with all the data that I let out, we'll be releasing like top lines of phone surveys, but I'm not actually going to release publicly call records. I'd share them with somebody else if they want to come review and help audit, but I think it's important that we not dox people who were free to talk to us. However, in this case, these are just raw voter records that were matched to the official list that the USPS has of all of their owned and leased facilities. So we'll be putting that out explicitly, and you can see a screenshot in the PowerPoint. I put that on Twitter, but we'll be releasing like the full voter file for all of these people, or all of these records where somebody had registered them and tried to, as you can see in the shot here, disguise the actual address as an apartment when there is no apartment, 5402 at 724 Charles Smith Senior Highway. So now for my conclusions. But before I do that, I want to read to you two stories from the New York Times. The first one was published on August 31st of 2020, and the headline is, "Trump is pushing a false argument on vote by mail fraud. Here are the facts." President Trump has begun pushing a false argument that has circulated among conservatives for years, that voting by mail is a recipe for fraud. Now I'm going to read you another story from the New York Times. This one was published on October 6, 2012. Voting by mail fraud is vastly more prevalent than the in-person voter fraud that has attracted far more attention, election administrators say. The flaws of absentee voting raise questions about the most elementary promises of democracy. Voting by mail is now common enough and problematic enough that election experts say there have been multiple elections in which no one can say with confidence which candidate was the deserved winner. Now, I've been involved in politics for a long time, and I can say with confidence that in 1992, Bill Clinton was the deserved winner based on the election. In 1996, he was the deserved winner based on the election for re-election. I can tell you that in 2008 and 2012, as much as it pains me to say it, Barack Obama won those elections. He was the, as the New York Times would put it, deserved winner. But I have no confidence that Joe Biden is the deserved winner of this election based on our findings and the current results of the election in the states of Wisconsin, Georgia, and Arizona, and potentially other states. He may have won. He may not have won. Trump may have lost. Trump may have been reelected. We just can't know because of how bad this election system has operated, because of all the problems that it has allowed that I brought to your attention. You know, when we were talking about this project with my team, somebody said, well, what if you had like $1 million and a bunch of FBI agents? Would you be able to find out the answer conclusively? Who won this election? And the answer is no, I couldn't. Even with all those resources, with all the resources in the world, I could not determine who had actually won this election given the problems that I've seen. And the problems that I've seen solely through the data I have discovered in this project. Not conspiracy theories, not crazy statistical analyses that I don't have the academic credentials to talk about or to understand. Everything I brought to you here is incredibly accessible. It's all easy to understand, or maybe you didn't know what NCOA was, maybe those initials don't mean anything to you, but you understand it now. And you understand how when somebody files a card and establishes residency in another state, it's very simple to understand that. Double voting, very simple to understand. Somebody living, breathing, saying, I did not cast that ballot, where the state says, yes, somebody cast that ballot and was signature verified as having cast that ballot in your name. Those are very easy and concrete things to understand. So the reality is that now this is all in the hands of lawyers and legislatures. I've done everything I can. I know that some of this work has gone into the hand of legislatures. All of it's gone to the hands of lawyers who are filing now as we speak and have filed in previous days using it. So I do want to make a couple of recommendations in terms of election reform that I think would help solve some of these problems. And the first among them is that we need a third party to audit these state registration files. They do such a poor job of hygiene, and some of the reasons they do that is because, or that they can't do good hygiene, is because of litigation getting in their way. But I really want to encourage third-party organizations and state parties and candidates to audit those states' lists and object to people being on those lists that shouldn't, either because they've moved away or because there's duplicates. And also for states themselves to do a much better job of hygiene. We need to have dates of birth of people. First, last names are so common. We need to know people's dates of birth, so that helps to certify who they are. We also need authenticated absentee ballot requests. Authenticated how? One solution I think of that might be workable is fingerprints. Is that every absentee ballot gets returned with a fingerprint that is then machine scanned and matched to the actual voter. So we know exactly who cast that ballot. Signatures, kind of questionable. And also hard to electronically or mechanically match. But with fingerprints, it's a much easier way to authenticate who actually sent that ballot in. So for those of you who are unfamiliar with absentee ballots, they tend to have three envelopes. There's the outer envelope that gets it to the clerk. There's the inner envelope that has the affidavit saying this is me, or the declaration. Maybe a witness signs that. And then inside that is another envelope which holds the ballot, so that somebody opening the outside ballot can't see, the affidavit level envelope can't see who you voted for. That middle envelope is where you would put the fingerprint, and then that gets scanned into a machine, and either it bounces because it didn't match, or goes in because it did. So I think that's some kind of way of authenticating absentee ballots is absolutely essential. The other thing that I want to touch on, and this is a little bit outside the scope of this study, is the need to change the way these electronic machines work. It is unconscionable for a democracy to operate with election equipment that is closed source software and closed source design. Every piece of election equipment in this country, hardware and software, must be open source. This is an issue that I think Democrats and Republicans can agree on. It can't be these closed black boxes with no idea exactly what's happening with the data inside, that's not reviewable by anybody outside the company. And this is a decision that each county, and in many cases states, and even the federal government can make. They need to mandate that this all must be open source. And there are several open source software packages already out there. I'm not going to evaluate any of them here, but there are companies that put these out. So there's a level of transparency in exactly how votes are being counted, and we absolutely have to have that. We cannot have votes being cast into black boxes, and this is an issue where, at least until recently, a lot of Democrats were making a lot of noise about it, and this is an issue where I find myself in complete agreement. So before I wrap up this very long video, I want to share a couple of final thoughts. A couple of weeks ago, I was talking to a friend of mine in Russia, and I asked him what's going on with the politics over there, because we've got a big election coming up over here. I'd like to know what's going on in your country. And he answered, well, nothing. He said that there really isn't much political activity in their country, not much political disagreement or efforts on both sides of the aisle like there are here to change things, because over there there's so much cynicism that what people do doesn't matter, because they believe, and maybe they're right, I don't know, that the regime over there decides the outcome of the election, that the voting does not matter. It doesn't affect the outcome, so why bother? Why invest the time? Why get excited? Why to try to change your country for the better if it isn't going to matter? And that left an impression on me. And the point I want to make here is that we cannot afford to become cynical like the citizens of Russia are, or other countries where votes don't seem to matter. Now, I understand that in this election, with it as close as it is, it seems that the outcome here is extremely questionable, and understand that. But it makes me think a little bit more, too, that, you know, in the process of doing this, I very much was hoping that we could come away with the conclusion that, yeah, it looks like Joe Biden won legitimately, was clean. Maybe there's a little bit of nefarious activity, a little bit of disorganization, but not enough that would make me doubt the outcome of the election. And I was actually hopeful that, you know, in the process of doing this, people on the left, people who are supporters of Joe Biden, would be supportive of this effort, because the thing that they would want is that if there's a cloud over the election, that somebody like me, who's doing a fair, transparent, and pretty broad analysis, would conclude that, you know, dispel that cloud that's over his presidency, and they would want that. But I also started to think that, you know, the notion of this election's outcome being questionable, maybe that kind of helps them. Because if you believe that voting doesn't matter, that your political activity doesn't matter, you'll be demoralized. That you'll stop coming out to vote, that you'll stop supporting candidates that reflect your views, because you've given up, because you, like the Russians, think that it doesn't matter if you vote. It doesn't matter if you get engaged in political activity, and all I can urge you to do is that you cannot give up. As an outgrowth of this project and the other activities I've been involved with, and my team have been involved with, we're going to be rolling out some solutions in the coming weeks on this front. So if you follow me on Twitter, or Gab, or Parler, or Facebook, or you've signed up to receive email through the Give, Send, Go, please do that, and please watch this space. But above all, keep the faith.